Hello, welcome to the Wellness Ways approach to the immune system. My name is Dr. Connor, and today I'm going to be talking all about how we've created a little bit of a fear and misunderstanding of what the immune system is and what it actually does. How we can start to understand better what that immune system actually does for us, how it functions, how we can best support it, and make sure that we're not doing things on a daily basis that are going to be detracting from that immune response. So if your goal is to figure out what you can do to protect yourself to make sure that you're not going to be vulnerable, especially going into cold and flu season here, then stick around, hang out, and we're going to give you a bunch of tips and advice on how to take care of your body and your immune system. So the first thing we have to do before we can talk about what the immune system is we got to just ask ourselves, what is the immune system? Now, when I do this talk in the office, I get to engage with everybody, and most of the time the feedback I get is that the immune system's job is to protect us from foreign invaders, right? So it's protecting us from bacteria, from viruses, from parasites, things that we may encounter as we go out into the world. And so while that is a very important piece of the immune system, that type of a definition, as we're going to see here, doesn't really tell us accurate pieces of information, right? So when we look at the immune system, if we look at the World Health Organization's definition of the immune system, looking at the U.S. National Library of Medicine here, you can see they define it as a complex network of cells, tissues, and organs that work together to help defend against the spread of germs, right? The Merck Manual says it's a collection of structure and processes protect against disease and other damaging foreign bodies. And this is a big theme we're going to see here throughout this presentation today, is that the medical system's view of the immune system is that it protects us from foreign invaders, when in reality the immune system has a very important regulatory role for internal things as well. And then it protects against viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Is that true? 100%. The immune system is extremely important at being able to protect us from those things that are coming into our body from the outside world. But if that's the only thing it does, then we're going to be missing a much greater piece of the immune system and what we're actually getting out of that. And what we can start to see is we have to dig a little bit deeper to understand, because if the immune system just goes after viruses, bacteria, parasites, then how is it that we have 100 trillion bacteria, trillion with a T, that colonize our normal gut flora? So inside of our digestive wall, we've got all these bacteria. Too many, too little can all cause problems. So it's very important that we have those bacteria. Now, if the immune system's job is to protect us from bacteria, how does it know the difference between the bacteria that are supposed to be there and the ones that aren't? So we have to dig a little bit deeper to understand how that immune system is actually responding to things. We also have these really cool things called bacteriophages. What bacteriophages are they're actually viruses that work to attack other foreign invaders in our digestive system and other areas of the body. So they're found in the mucosal membranes lining the digestive, respiratory, and reproductive tracts. Mucus is a thick, jelly-like material that provides a physical barrier against invading bacteria and protects the underlying cells from being infected. So the research suggests that these phages present in the mucus are part of our natural immune system, protecting human body from invading bacteria. So we have viruses, which we thought the immune system was supposed to destroy viruses, but we actually have viruses that are helping to protect us from other bacteria that aren't supposed to be there. The whole time we're avoiding the 100 trillion bacteria that we're supposed to have. So this immune system is a very, very complex, right? So current definition, the cells and molecules responsible for immunity. The human body invests heavily in cells dedicated to defense. Again, very, very important that we do this. There's a lot of things outside of our bodies that are trying to harm us if they get into us. So it's very important that we're defending our bodies. The immune system is the body's defense against infections. But their definition, it's not well defined, and it's all based on infectious agents coming into the body, when in reality that's only a small portion of what the immune system does. So if we want to fully understand how the immune system functions and what its role is in protecting our bodies, we've got to come up with a new definition, right? So our definition here at The Wellness Way is the immune system is all the mechanisms used by the body as protection against environmental agents, both internal and external. So that internal piece is very important. We'll talk about cancer a little bit. Cancer cells are human cells that did not replicate properly. And so our immune system is actually designed to recognize, hey, these are normal cells. These cells didn't replicate properly, they're not normal, let's clear them out of our body. And the breakdown of that response, or that clearing out of those abnormal cells, is what leads to cancers, tumors, things like that. So again, internal, external, that are foreign to the body. The agents can be either microorganisms, so viruses, bacteria, parasites, yeast, things like that, but it can also be chemical products, so the toxins, the chemicals we're putting on our skin, the things we're breathing, the things we're getting in our drinking water, foods, chemicals, drugs, pollen, so all of our allergies, environmental pollen, animals, dandruff, things like that, or abnormal cells. And again, that abnormal cells is going to start going back into the cancer cells. We create trillions of cells on a daily basis. Again, they don't all replicate properly. And so if we don't have the mechanism set up, and we'll talk about natural killer cells, which are just awesome at helping to clear those types of cells out. If those natural killer cells aren't robust enough to clear all those cells out, we start clumping them together. They start growing too rapidly for us to be able to deal with, and that's what creates cancers and tumors and things like that. So cancer is an immune system problem, and if we don't correct the immune system that allowed those cancers to start to grow and develop, chances are they're going to come back again in the future, which is why cancers go into remission for a while and then they relapse or reoccur, because we never actually corrected the immune system or the body that allowed that to happen in the first place. So today we're going to talk about how we can make those immune responses strong again. So we just gave you a new definition of the immune system. What we're going to talk is how the immune system responds, how the body adapts to the environment, how the medical system currently treats it, what weakens that immune response, how we can build a strong immune response, and then how can we measure that to know where you're at now. I don't just want to give you the tools and resources to know how to, number one, not weaken your immune system, but number two, build it up. We want to talk about how we can actually test that immune response so that we can see where you're at now, what your risk is if you go to a family party and you have a bunch of people that are sick around you, if you're going out into big public spaces, things like that. We want to know that we're protected. And there's ways that we can test that to understand what our protection level is, what our risk level might be as well. So this is what we're typically taught about when it comes to the immune system, that kids, really strong. As you age, that immune system deteriorates and we have to protect you. So during COVID, that's all we heard, everybody shouting from the rooftops, don't do it because of you, do it to protect grandma, do it to protect grandpa, do it to protect the immunocompromised, right? And that's because we've been trained that our immune systems are really strong when we're young and then they weaken as we age. Now, this could not be further from the truth under normal circumstances. However, because of the amount of stress that we put on our bodies, because of the toxins and chemicals in our environment, because we're damaging our immune systems and weakening those immune systems so much, oftentimes, unfortunately, that is the case where as we age, we have way more stress on our body. We're exposed to these infectious agents for so much longer that immune response just gets beat down. And my goal tonight is to teach you how to not weaken your immune response so that this can actually be what happens. Because from a physiological standpoint, this is the way the immune system is designed to respond. We'll talk about the difference between our innate and our adaptive immune systems tonight. The innate immune system is the system that you're born with. We all have that. That's going to be this part of the shield right here, right? But this piece down here that we have to develop as we age is called our adaptive immune response. The only way that we build that adaptive immune response is by exposing our bodies to infectious agents that the immune system can then go and fight. Because it's that going to battle against all sorts of different things as we age and grow that builds those strong defense mechanisms. So we talked about the whole, if you drank out of a hose when you were a kid, you're immune to a lot of things. And part of that's true because we were putting our mouths on dirty, gross, rusty hoses. We were exposing ourselves to lots of germs. We were rolling around in the dirt, doing all those things. And all of those things were awesome at helping to build that immune response. Now, do I recommend going and doing that today? Especially not in Lakewood Ranch because there's so many chemicals, chlorine, hormonal agents, things like that in our water system. We don't want to just be going drinking unfiltered tap water. Don't go drink the water out of your faucet either, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the hygiene hypothesis basically states that the overwashing of hands, the over-cleaning of our bodies actually, number one, wipes off a lot of that biological barrier that we'll talk about here in a couple slides, but it's also limiting the exposure that we're getting to a lot of those infectious agents. And if we're not exposing ourselves to infectious agents as young kids to build that immune response, well, that shield's never going to build up, and we're going to get to the point where we're elderly and we never built our immune system to begin with, and then we're doing a ton of things to put stress on it, to weaken it. when we get to the point where we're here and we have no immune defenses left. So again, my goal today is to teach you what we can start to do to build that immune response back up and what types of things we need to avoid to make sure that we're not depleting that immune response. So let's talk about first how that immune response works. So like I said, there's a couple different pieces here. We've got 4 different kind of zones or boxes we'll talk about. The first piece here is our innate immune system. So we've got barriers like our skin, like mucosal barriers in the nose, the mouth, the digestive lining, things like that, that are designed to keep things that are outside of the body out of the body. In order for the immune system to respond to something, it has to come inside the body, and so something has to break or damage that barrier. So if something damages the barrier, we get those foreign invaders, those pathogens, into the cells, and we have these really cool chemical messengers. They're called cytokines. They're going to start to stimulate and call in a lot of other troops. So we got cells right here. Those cells are going to recognize that something came into the body that's not supposed to. They're macrophages, they're dendritic cells. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a couple slides. But those cells are going to start signaling to other molecules within the immune system to start coordinating that immune response. And this is all part of our innate immune system. These cells don't need to be primed. They don't need to be activated before they can start to function. All they need to do is recognize that something just came into the body that's not me. I'm going to get rid of it. And so they call in that adaptive immune response. So we've got our lymphocytes, CD4, CD8 cells, we've got B cells, and the B cells are the antibodies. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about the way the medical system tries to approach and manipulate your immune system with things like vaccines. We're focused heavily on this antibody response. So how many people watching this right now, remember during COVID, everybody needs to get their vaccine, right? And the vaccine's job is to increase antibodies. All we're doing is we're bypassing this piece of the immune system. We're focusing on increasing antibodies, which, by the way, when we bypass all these normal systems, we actually can decrease these CD4 cells, the T helper cells, and I'll show you some examples of that in blood work here in a couple minutes. And then we're also ignoring the fact that B cells don't actually get rid of infections. They make it easier for the body to get rid of infections. We have to have antibodies to viral infections, things like that, if we want to be able to clear them out in a faster, rapid manner. But the antibodies themselves don't actually clear anything out of the system. We have to have this eradication system set up with natural killer cells here, with CD8 cells over here that are going to actually be able to break down and destroy those virally infected cells, cancer cells, tumors, things like that. So we've got to understand how the immune system talks to itself, what those different pieces are, and what the different steps are. So like I've said, first step here is that barrier. So the barriers are, again, skin, designed to keep things out of the body. So the barriers have a couple different pieces. So there's a physical barrier, that's the cells that prevent things from crossing those borders. So think your skin, the endothelial lining of your respiratory tract, of your urinary tract, your digestive tract, all of those things. So we have a physical cellular barrier that keeps things out. Some of those barriers are selectively permeable, which allows certain things to come through, certain things to stay on the outside. We also have chemical barriers and biological barriers. So chemical barriers, think the stomach acid in your stomach. That is the most acidic place in your body. Part of the reason is because you want to be able to break down and digest food, but the other part is that that acid actually deactivates a lot of those pathogens that may have come in on your skin or in your food. So we swallow, we drink water, we're eating food that has chemicals, bacteria, things like that on it. That acid is one of our first lines of defense of deactivating those bacteria or those pathogens before they can infect us. Then we have biological barriers. So we actually have trillions of bacteria in our gut. We've got bacteria all over our skin, in our hair, our mucous membranes, things like that. And those bacteria actually form a very important role in helping to break down infectious agents as well. So we talked about the hygiene hypothesis, the overwashing of our hands. We take showers all the time, wash our hair all the time. We're constantly sanitizing our environment. And we're really breaking down and damaging those biological barriers. So chemical barriers, our skin is acidic, our respiratory tracts are acidic, our stomach is acidic. That acid helps to, again, deactivate. So right away, one of the first things that we can do is start to increase acid production. So if you notice, you use hand soap, things like that. It has that lemony scent. Well, the lemon in there is actually very acidic. Apple cider vinegar, very acidic. So putting apple cider vinegar on your skin and your hair, places like that, can actually help to support that first line chemical barrier. The physical barrier is making sure that we're not constantly damaging our skin, cutting ourselves, falling, scraping things. If you think about the acute reaction that happens if you fall down, you skin your knee. It's going to get inflamed. It's going to get a little bit red. We're going to get a scab that forms there. The key is that you only damage that barrier one time. You fell, you tripped, you skinned your knee, you got back up, your body healed itself, right? Imagine that we don't stop skinning our knee, and every single day we scrape our knee on the ground, and that barrier never actually starts to heal again. And that's one of the biggest things in the gut. We get leaky gut, which is where we're basically damaging that intestinal wall because of viruses, because of pathogens, because of chemicals, food particles, organ malfunction, stress, all sorts of things that can start to break down that physical barrier. And then we're just going to have a bombardment on the immune system because everything's getting through those leaky joints, right? So we've got to pay really close attention to the physical barriers, chemical barriers, biological barriers. And again, those barriers happen respiratory tract, GI tract, genitourinary tract, nose and pharynx, the skin, of course. So anywhere that the outside environment is going to come into contact with the internal environment. Then we talk about the innate immune response. So again, the innate immune response is that immune system that you're born with. And it's made up of a bunch of different cool cells that are specialized to do specific things. So we've got neutrophils, mast cells, basophils, dendrite cells, eosinophils, monocytes, macrophages, and natural killer cells. And each one of these cells has a very specialized role. And they're all actually able to communicate with each other too, so that we can amplify that normal immune response. Those cells don't just come up from nowhere. They all come from a very common stem cell line. And your body actually is really cool when it can break those cells down and it can develop specific cells based on what's going on. And we can actually test for all of this. So this is what's called a CBC. If you've ever had blood work run, chances are you've had a CBC done. And basically what that looks at is we look at all of our red blood cells, but we also look at white blood cells. And the differential down here shows us what types of white blood cells are showing up. Now this is a patient that's had a lot of stress going on, and their white blood cell count's actually low here. Now if we don't have the cells that make up the immune response that help us to clear out foreign invaders, if we can see that we're low, is that going to be a good day? No, probably not, because this person doesn't have the defense mechanism. We can actually look down here a little bit further and see specifically which types of cells are low. So they're low in granulocytes, they're low in lymphocytes, so we're not going to be able to fight off those bacterial or viral infections. Now, why are we low? Well, that's the million-dollar question. That's what we have to start digging into to figure out what types of stresses on the body, what's been stressing that immune system for so long that now we're out of gas. And I always describe this kind of like driving your car 100 miles an hour down the highway. Now, is it okay to drive your car 100 miles an hour down the highway? Let's say racetrack. So we're not speeding, we're not breaking any laws, but we're going 100 miles an hour. Sure, it's fun. Sure, it's okay for the car. It can handle doing that for a little bit. But what's going to happen is if we don't ever take our foot off the gas pedal, well, in that situation, we're going to put a lot more wear and tear on the engine, but what we're also going to do is start draining that gas tank. So if we want to avoid running out of gas, there's two things we can do. We can either take our foot off the gas, which is the equivalent of removing the stress from the body, or we have to stop and fill the gas tank up more often. We have to give the body a lot of nutrients, because really all your body is just biochemical pathways. When we can start to understand the pathways here, we can get a way better understanding of how your body's working. And if we know that we're always driving specific pathways within the body, then we know that we need to support those pathways, because we're just going to be burning through the same nutrients that are needed to run those pathways. And when we've burnt through all those nutrients, the pathway slows down, it stops, and we end up in this depleted state here. So understanding, number one, what that driver is, what's got our foot on the gas, because we have to remove that. We can't heal the body if we're constantly putting stress on it. And then we also have to understand, what do we need in order to support that pathway to build it back up so that we can heal and repair the body. So looking at neutrophils here, and there's no test on this. It's not important that you know all these things. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this stuff, but we'll talk about the basics of some of these cell types here. So neutrophils, most abundant immune cells. We've got more neutrophils than any other cells in our body. Not other cells, but any other immune cells in our body. Make up about, on average, 60-70% of that normal immune response. These are going to be the cells that are mainly responsible for going after bacterial infections. And they're really cool. They're called phagocytic cells, which means that they're like the Mr. Pac-Man. They come in, they engulf cells. They've got enzymes in these little granules in here that break down and deactivate those cells, and then we're able to actually clear that out. Now, if we have a huge immune response, these neutrophils can only eat so many cells. A neutrophil can take on about 15 to 20 bacterial cells, and then it's going to die. And as that neutrophil dies, it creates a pus, right? So if we think about acne, pus on infections, and things like that, basically what that pus response is just all these dead neutrophils that have engulfed all those bacteria. So it's kind of gross, it's kind of yucky, but it's cool if you understand what that actual response is and where that's coming from in the body. So next cell up is mast cells. So these cells actually reside in connective tissue. They're responsible for creating a histamine response. Now, histamine is a very cool cytokine. It's an enzyme, or not an enzyme, it's a hormone that's going to actually call other cells in. So it's going to start to signal that immune response. So histamine, heparin, things like that, those are both going to start to coordinate that immune response. They're going to call in the troops. So we damage a barrier, we damage that connective tissue, the mast cells get activated, they create that histamine response. A lot of times what you notice is that you get a scab, it's really itchy. And part of that is because we've damaged and we've broken down those mast cells, we've created that histamine response, we get that itchiness at the site. That is just a really cool, again, a cool part of understanding how that immune response is actually working within your body. Basophils. Basophils are going to go after mainly parasitic infections. Eosinophils, these are going to be parasitic infections, also all of our anaphylactic reactions. So anaphylactic allergic reactions, things like that. Monocytes. So monocytes are going to be broken down into macrophages and dendritic cells. On a CBC, we're just going to see the word monocyte, or a lot of times it will just say MO, which stands for monocyte. These are very large. They can differentiate into either one of these cells, and these are going to be the first line immune responses. So these are the first cell types that we're going to see elevate in an acute infection. And what they're going to do is they're called signaling molecules. Basically, all foreign invaders coming into the body have these little protein structures on the outside of them. They're called antigens. And that's what allows the immune system to say, these cells are human cells. These cells are my cells. They've got a little white flag on them. Everything is good with these cells. Everything else that doesn't have this white flag, not good. So these are going to recognize the little protein structures, those little flags that are on the outside of the foreign cells, and they're actually going to make a bunch of them and start waving those flags up so all the other cells within the immune system can see this is the type of cell that we're going after. This is what we need to attack and fight. We've got these dendrite cells. So dendrite actually means branch. They're really cool. They've got all these little long wavy arms, or like octopuses with these tentacles that can just bind to all these different cell types that are coming in. So we talked about all the different types of cells. We see all of these cells here on a CBC. But what did we not talk about? Is that natural killer cell. And if we go back and look at that immune response, or not the immune response, sorry, if we go back and look at that complete blood count here, we can see we've got the granulocytes. Granulocytes are neutrophils. We've got the lymphocytes, the monocytes, the eosinophils, the basophils. The monocytes, again, being the macrophages and dendritic cells. But what do we not have? We don't have natural killer cells on there. And why is that? Well, we don't want to get down a huge role, but medicine typically only covers, or only will do what insurance covers. Insurance only covers things that are going to either give you a diagnosis that can be fixed through drugs, surgery, things like that. If we don't have a fix to it, a lot of times we just aren't going to be looking at it, which is unfortunate, but that's just what we see on a consistent basis. So we've got all these cells over here that we just talked about, and then we've got natural killer cells, lymphocytes. These are going to be part of the adaptive immune response, but the natural killer cells, super cool. They're actually part of our innate immune response. And again, these are going to be the cell types that are very important for cancer cells. Now, a lot of our other cells have to be primed and activated, which means that those macrophages, the dendritic cells, they've got to start waving that flag up that says, this is what we're looking for. Everybody go attack this thing. Natural killer cells don't need to be primed. They don't need to be activated. They can actually activate and increase the response from the rest of the immune system. But all they're doing is they're just surveying. So they're saying, I'm looking for anything that is not self. Any cell, any type of organism in my body that's not waving that little white flag, my job is to go after and destroy that. And again, that's really important because of tumor and cancer cells. So again, the body makes trillions of cells on a daily basis. We're constantly replicating and turning those cells over. And not every single cell that's formed is formed correctly. So the correctly formed cells all have that little white flag. If it's not formed correctly, it's not going to have that same white flag. And the natural killer cells are going to be able to recognize that and clear those cells out. Now, if we have enough natural killer cells to be able to keep up with the production of unnatural or incorrectly formed cells, everything's fine and dandy. The problem is if we can't clear those cells out fast enough, if they start dividing too rapidly, then we're going to start to clump those cell types together, and that's what forms cancers and tumors. And those rapidly dividing cell types are going to start to create big problems for us in our body. And this is really where natural killer cells came from. So they can kill those cancer type cells, and they also kill virally infected cells. So natural killer cells here, a type of immune cell that has granular, so small particles with enzymes that kill tumor cells or cells infected with a virus. We know here natural killer cells were first noticed for their ability to kill tumor cells without any priming or prior activation. Again, that's one of the coolest things here is that they're just surveying all the time, and they don't need to be activated, so they can respond very quickly, and they can respond to any cell type that's not a human cell. So the cytotoxic T cells, which we're going to talk about as part of that adaptive response, they have to be primed, they have to be activated. There's a whole cascade we go through, and they're very specific for one cell type. Natural killer cells, not specific, lots of cell types, super, super cool. So we talked about barrier function. All the cells we just talked about, part of that innate response, that's the response that we're born with. Now we're going to talk about the acquired response, which is the response that we have to grow and develop and nurture over our lifetime. And developing a good acquired immune response is what's going to really build that strong shield, give us a strong and robust immune response. So the acquired immune response, again, not present at birth, develops in response to an infection. If we don't have infections, we talk about bubble boy, things like that, where they're just super protected, the hygiene hypothesis, no infections means no activation of the adaptive immune response, means no building of strength, protection, things like that. So how does that adaptive immune response work? So I like to use the analogy of a bank robber. I'm going to use a lot of analogies. The immune system is very complicated. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible so we can get a generalized understanding. Just know that analogies are not always perfect. There's things that aren't 100% correlated, but we're going to do the best we can with this analogy here, and we're going to start to see how we can test to see where we're at along this pathway too. So we're using a bank robber as an example. So we've got our barrier, that first part of our immune response, barrier function. Banks have barriers. The banks have the outside glass. They've got the doors on the front of the bank. They've got the tellers behind the counter. So we've got a couple different barriers there. So all day long, people are coming in and out of the bank. The tellers are recognizing, all right, this person's a normal customer. This person's a normal customer. This person's a normal customer. Everything's fine. All of a sudden, amongst all the normal customers walking in, someone walks in with a mask, a gun, a big old bag over their shoulder. Bank teller immediately recognizes, wait a minute, you don't look like everybody else that's coming into the bank. So the bank teller in this example is going to be the macrophages or the dendritic cells, part of that innate immune response. They're going to say, all right, you're not supposed to be here. What's the bank teller going to do when they recognize someone that's not supposed to be in the bank that's going to try to rob them? They all got that silent alarm sitting under the desk. So bank teller is going to hit the silent alarm. Silent alarm is now going to ring to the 911 dispatch center. So in this example, the 911 dispatch center is our T helper cells. So CD4 cells, we can see those on blood work as CD4 plus or CD4 positive T lymphocytes. So T helper cells are the 911 dispatching center. Now the T helper cells are going to get the call. They're going to know, okay, something's going on at the bank. We need to start to coordinate the response that we're going to get. And that coordination has a lot of different things that take place. So we've got our natural killer cells right over here that we just talked about. They're kind of like the guys that are just walking down the street. They're not looking for anything specific. They're not looking for a specific bank robber. They're not looking for a guy robbing an ATM. They're not looking for anything specifically, but they're going to notice a lot of different things, right? So they'll notice the bank robber. They'll notice the guy robbing the ATM. They'll notice the guy selling drugs on the corner. They'll notice the guy breaking into a car, right? They're going to know all of those things that are going on and be able to stop any type of crime that's taking place, right? The CD8 cells here, those cytotoxic T cells, those are the SWAT team. The SWAT team got a picture of the bank robber, and they're going to go into the bank and they're going to go after one specific thing. The natural killer cells don't need primed. They're always there. They're always walking around. The CD8 cells need that activation. Otherwise, the SWAT team's just hanging out at home doing nothing, waiting for a call from the dispatch center to say, this is what we're looking for. let's go after it. The T regulatory cells here, these are kind of like your chief of police. So we get that call, there's a bank robber, chief of police shows up, says, yes, there is in fact a bank robber, let's go ahead and create that response. Similarly, once we've gone in and gotten the bank robber out of the bank, the chief of police is going to say, all right, we got the bad guy, party's over, let's all go home. And they do that through these T suppressor cells. So we've got these different types of cell responses here. Those are going to keep a lid on that immune response. In autoimmune conditions, which we're not going to talk a ton about today, autoimmune conditions, the Treg cells break down. We can't put a lid back on that immune response, and that's when we start going after host cells, our own body tissue, things like that. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. We've got an autoimmune talk. We'll talk about that in depth in the future. But for today's purposes, we're going to talk a lot more about this response over here. And then we've got our B cell antibodies. So the antibodies, basically the responsibility of the antibodies is going to be to bind things together. Now, antibodies don't necessarily fit into the bank robber example. So I have another example I use for talking about antibody responses. So with that antibody response, I kind of use the garbage collectors as a kind of an example here. So think about, normally everybody puts their trash in the trash cans within the house. We take all the trash from the trash cans, we put it into a big trash bin, take the trash bin out to the street. Garbage guy comes by once or twice a week, picks up the trash bin, takes it to the recycling center. All is fine and dandy, trash levels stay low in the house. So in that example, the trash guy who comes and picks up your trash and takes it somewhere, those are going to be our natural killer cells, our cytotoxic T cells. Those are going to be the cells of eradication. In that example, the waste bin or the trash bin is going to be our B cells. So B cells' job is to neutralize, to deactivate, to bind, clump together, to make it easier for the eradication cells to clear that out. So a couple things can happen. Number one is we don't have any antibodies. In that case, we don't have any trash cans. So the trash guys are still there. They're still coming around to your house, but they have to stop at every single house, go into the house, pick up all the trash from all the rooms, take it to the truck, go to the next house. Same thing. And if they have to do that much work to get the trash is going to start to accumulate because it's going to seriously slow us down. So it's very important that we have a good, healthy number of those cells of eradication. Other side of this is we've got all the trash bins. Everybody puts their trash out to the street, but we have half as many guys coming to pick it up. And so we don't make it through the whole route the first day. And then we don't make it through the whole route the second day. And again, trash starts to accumulate and pile up. So we have to have both of these responses working well in order to make sure that we're putting the trash to the street, we're picking it up, we're taking it away, and everything's going to work the way it's supposed to. So again, those two can't act on their own, and we'll talk about why that's kind of a problem in our current medical manipulation of the immune system here in a little bit. But back to our awesome CD4 cells. So CD4 cells, the CD4 count is like the snapshot of how well your immune system is functioning. So CD4 positive T cells are white blood cells that fight infection. The more you have, the better. These are the cells that the HIV virus kills. So CD4 cells were initially discovered through HIV research. So the CD4-CD8 ratio, they use that to kind of gauge how well you're doing or how poorly you're doing with progression of HIV, AIDS, things like that. So cells of the HIV virus kills. As HIV infection progresses, the number of these cells declines. When the CD4 count drops below 200, the person is diagnosed with AIDS. The normal range for CD4 cells is about 500 to 1500. Usually the CD4 cell count increases when the HIV virus is controlled with effective HIV treatment. Now, this is where the medical system likes to pigeonhole things a little bit. So I actually tried to run a CD4-CD8 count on a patient to get an understanding of how their immune system was responding. They wanted to try to go through insurance. They went to their primary care doctor. They took a list of what I wanted to see. And their doctor said, you don't have HIV. Why would I run this panel? You don't need it. We're not running it. And it's like, what do you mean you're not going to run it? How are we going to understand how the immune system is responding? How are we going to understand if we can actually get rid of a bank robber if he comes into the bank if we don't know how many bank tellers we have, if we don't know who's answering the phone at the 911 dispatch center, if we don't know that the SWAT team's there? How are we going to be comfortable and feel safe and protected if we don't know that all those different systems are set up properly? But we know it does so much, right? So the CD4 lymphocytes help coordinate the immune response by stimulating other immune cells, such as macrophages, B lymphocytes, which are our antibodies, CD8 T lymphocytes, those SWAT teams, the cytotoxic T cells. The CD8 cells, the foot soldiers of the immune system, these are what's actually going in and getting rid of infections. So they're going to be the ones that the SWAT team goes in, they actually take the bank robber out of the bank, right? Cytotoxic T cells, which are important for killing cancerous or virally infected cells. Again, cancerous cells, virally infected cells, not just HIV. So why are we not running this on patients who have cancer, on patients who have chronic viral infections? Why are we not just running it on people who want to know that they can fight cancer or fight a virus? Say the next pandemic comes on. I want to know that I'm protected. I want to know that my body is capable of fighting those infections before I just get sick and it's too late. And unfortunately, we're not doing that type of stuff. And that's why those types of viral infections, COVID, the flu, just fly through populations because nobody knows if they're protected and nobody's doing things to protect themselves. And it's so simple, guys. All we have to do is run an immune panel like this. We can see all of our mature T cells. We can see our CD4 cells. We can see our CD8 cells. We can see our CD56 cells, the natural killer cells. We can see the ratios, the lymphocytes. We can test for this stuff. So why aren't we doing it? And this is another perfect example of a patient who came in. Unfortunately, he had to get the COVID vaccine for work. Knew it wasn't good for him, didn't want to get it, had no choice. And he came in and he said, "Doc, I just had to do something I didn't want to. I just had to manipulate my immune system. Can you tell me if I'm in a good spot now? If not, can we work to improve that?" Is this patient in a good spot right now? And even if you can't read the numbers, you can see low, 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 high as a percentage. It's the only thing that's not flagged as low. That's why the percentage is high, and low again. So he's got no antibodies, or he's got no mature T cells. He's got no CD4 cells. He's got even less CD8 cells, and he's got no antibodies. How is he going to fight any viral infection? How is he going to fight any cancer infection if he doesn't have the resources to clear the infections out? So we tested for it, said, hey, this is where you're at. The good news is there's things that we can do to help support that. And we're going to talk about what that looks like here in a couple slides. We'll come back to that, but I thought slides are messed up. I'm mixed up. It's all right. We're going to come back to that exact same piece of blood work and we'll show you what the after looks like on that. But before that, we're going to talk about how medicine treats that, right? So what are we doing? We talked about this. We've got our 4 phases here. The innate immune response activates the adaptive immune response. We take all the trash out to the trash can and then we get rid of it. So we've got our signaling molecules, we've got our trash bins, and we've got our trash guys. This is what the medical system focuses on. It's the antibodies. How many people remember when the COVID vaccine first came out and they were screaming till they were blue in the face, antibodies, antibodies, antibodies. We have to build an antibody response. Everybody needs antibodies. If we don't have them, we're going to be sick, right? Right here. This is what they were focusing on. Now, what is an antibody? Like I said, antibodies are very, very important. We have to have antibodies, but it's not the only thing. Is it important? Yes. Is it the only thing? No. Basically, an antibody is a class of proteins called immunoglobulins. We've got 5 different types of immunoglobulins. They're made of specialized white blood cells to identify and neutralize foreign materials to an immune system. Identify, neutralize. Neutralize does not mean destroy. It does not mean eradicate. It means deactivate. So they're identifying and they're deactivating, but they're not getting rid of anything. So they have a highly variable region, and therefore this allows the immune system to tailor its response to a countless range of threats. We have antibodies to the Epstein-Barr virus. We have antibodies to the cytomegalovirus. We have antibodies to the COVID virus. We have antibodies to all these different viruses. When that virus comes into our system, we produce a lot of the antibodies to that specific virus. If we've never seen the virus before, we cannot have antibodies to it. Again, exposing ourselves to these viral infections at a young age helps us build that antibody reserve pool, helps us build that acquired immune response. So what is the antibody doing? We get this antigen-antibody complex. Antigen, that's the flag that all of those cells wave up that says, this is who I am. The immune system says, well, that might be who you are, but that's not who I am, so I'm going to get rid of you. So we've got the antigen-antibody complex. Antigen, we bind, we create this complex. We're neutralizing, we're binding everything together, we're glutenizing, and we're precipitating. we're also going to activate these complement proteins, which then will activate the cascade of phagocytosis, inflammation, which pulls more immune cells to the site, and then cell lysis, which is that eventual destruction of the cell. So it's going to help activate, it's going to help slow the viral infection down, but it's not going to get rid of it by itself. So this is basically how that antibody response works. We got all those viruses, we bind them together, and then we've got Mr. Pac-Man comes in, eats, and destroys. You got to have the antibody complex. We've got to have Mr. Pac-Man. So, what do we know? Well, we know that the COVID antibodies don't guarantee long-term immunity. Why is that? Well, antibodies are not meant to always be high in the system. They're meant to spike during infection, and then they gradually come back down, and we don't detect huge levels of those antibodies. So just because you had antibodies once for COVID, if you're trying to make those antibodies stay high all the time, that's not the way the immune system works. It's not the way the body works. But what do they tell us? Get the COVID vaccine, spike our antibodies. Antibodies start to drop down, booster, drop down, booster, drop down, booster. And what did that do to us? Well, now we know what happened. Now we know, this is from the Florida Department of Health. Providers and patients should be aware of the outstanding safety and efficacy concerns. Studies across geographic regions have found that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are associated with negative effectiveness after 4 to 6 months. Negative effectiveness, what does that mean? It means that we spiked that immune response and it made us worse after 4 to 6 months. How is that helping anybody's long-term immune response? It's not, but we did it anyways. So, we talk about that antibody response. We have different types of antibodies. The IgM antibodies, that red line, is the first thing that spikes up. Then we have the IgG antibodies. So if we look at chronic viral infections, we can see, is it a chronic latent infection? Do we just have IgG antibodies? Is it an active infection? Do we have IgM antibodies too? So that can kind of help us differentiate through blood work what we're looking at with viral infected cells. So we also show that the surveillance of latent infection in normal animals depends on CD4 and CD8 T cells, suggesting that T cells might be capable of preventing the establishment of latency. What does latency mean? Well, it means that that virus came into our system, we knocked it down a little bit, but then we never fully got rid of it. So it's just kind of hanging out dormant, and it's putting stress on the immune system all the time. Talk about running those pathways, constantly having our foot on the gas. Well, if you have these latent infections that are constantly just creating that low-level immune response, we're going to end up depleting that immune system. We're going to run out of CD4 cells. We're going to run out of CD8 cells. And it's not going to put us in a good position to be able to fight new infections that come on. So vaccine-induced CD4 T cells leads to adverse effects in the mouse model of infection. So what did we do? We manipulated the immune system and we created adverse responses within that immune system. And that brings us back to the patient here with low, 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 low. Got the vaccine for work. Everything was low. That blood work was done in December of 2021. We worked on some stuff for about 4 months. He came back in April of 22. Nothing is in the red anymore. Your immune system can adapt, it can respond, it can heal, it can repair if we're doing the right things. What do we think this would have looked like if he got all his boosters? Still super low, just like it did after the first one. But we stopped the stress, we gave the immune system things it needed to heal, and it recovered. I don't know how he's doing now. His main goal, he came in and he said, "Doc, I had to do something I didn't want to do. Can you fix me?" Blood work showed everything got back to normal. He knows the things he needs to do to continue building that immune response. Grateful because now he knows where his immune system is at and he knows he's going to be protected the next time a threat comes. So the innate response calls the adaptive immune response into play, and both work together to eliminate pathogens. What does that mean? It means the innate response activates this response. If we bypass our skin barriers, if we bypass those mucosal barriers, if we bypass all of those initial innate cells and only focus on this, have we activated this part and gone through the normal immune process? And the answer is no. So if we're bypassing the normal immune responses, how are we going to be building a healthy immune response? And the answer is, we're not. What else weakens that immune response? Well, there's a lot of things that weaken that immune response. And if we look at the things we're doing as a culture and as a country, and we look at where we're at with our healthcare, we can tell that things that we're doing are not helping. What's happening? Well, if you look at the United States, this is directly from the CDC website, 6 in 10 adults have at least one chronic disease. That's 60% of American adults have at least one chronic disease. 4 in 10, 40% have 2 or more chronic diseases. Well, how can that be? We're spending more money on healthcare than ever before. We have more advancements in science than ever before. We know more about the human body than ever before. We have more access to drugs and surgery than ever before. How can we be getting worse and worse? And the answer is that our approach is all wrong. What is our approach? Well, we talk about the leading causes of death and disability: heart disease, cancer, chronic lung diseases, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, chronic kidney disease. We're spending more money on cardiovascular drugs than we ever have before. Statins alone are $1 billion a year industry. How are we doing on heart disease? How many people remember in October when we went through and raised a ton of money for cancer research? How are we doing on cancer? It's time that we stop trying to manipulate the body with medications, with surgeries, with waiting until we have a disease to treat things. And it's time we start taking a proactive approach. Well, what does the CDC say we need to do? Eliminate tobacco. Everybody knows that. We've got to get rid of tobacco. We can't be inflaming our bodies. We can't be putting that stuff into our bodies if we want to be healthy. Everybody knows that. How about excessive alcohol use? Now, I'm not saying is one drink a night good, is one drink a night bad. Excessive alcohol use, and there's no argument it's not good to drink excessively. How about poor nutrition? And this is where we have the conversation with our patients all the time. Well, I don't know. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do? You go online, you Google, what should I eat? You have 1,000 different people. Eat fruits and vegetables. Eat carbs. Don't eat vegetables, they're going to kill you. Don't eat fruit, it's going to kill you. Sugar is poison, you can't eat meat, you can't do any of this stuff. It's so confusing what we need to do. Poor nutrition, okay, thanks CDC. That's not very helpful. No one knows what that means. How about lack of physical activity? Think about the first thing they did when COVID came. Shut down the gyms. Don't go outside. Stay inside. Don't move. Don't do anything. Well, how are we supposed to support our immune systems if we're not able to go work out, if we're not able to move, if we're not able to do anything that's supposed to be healthy for us and help us avoid chronic diseases? So yeah, we say these things. Are we doing them? No. Do we know what it even means? Do we even know how to do it? No. So what weakens the immune system? How about mental stress? How many people sitting behind the computer, behind your phone right now have ever experienced mental stress? And I see a lot of hands raising. I can tell you're raising your hands. Everybody has mental stress. We're more stressed out than we've ever been before. And we know stress, depression, the immune system, and cancer. We know it's related, but we're still so stressed out. The links between the physiological features of cancer risk and progression have been studied through psychoneuroimmunology, the link between the brain, the nerves, and the immune system. The persistent activation of the HPA axis, so the brain's signaling with your adrenal glands, the stress response, and the chronic stress response and the depression probably impairs the immune response and contributes to the progression of some types of cancers. How many people have known someone with cancer who accepted their diagnosis and said, this is not going to be the end of me, and they had much better outcomes than someone who had cancer, got depressed, got stressed, said there's nothing I can do to help myself, and they got sicker and sicker. We know it happens, but what are we doing to talk to people about managing their mental stress? Not enough. How about sugar? We know sugar is terrible for the immune system. We know sugar is poisonous, but what do we do every single year? We go out, we trick or treat, we eat a ton of sugar and candy around the holidays. We put out jars of M&Ms everywhere. Is any of that good for the immune system? No. Here's why. Vitamin C is very important for building strong neutrophils. So strong immune cells need vitamin C. Vitamin C uses the same transporter into the cell as sugar. If we have chronic sugar, the sugar is going to be activating or constantly taking up that GLUT1 receptor. We're not going to be able to get vitamin C into the cell. We're not going to be able to build strong, healthy cells. Everybody says, you're sick, take vitamin C. Well, yeah, what are we doing? We're flooding the system with vitamin C to hopefully override some of that sugar at that GLUT1 receptor to hopefully strengthen those immune responses. So should we take vitamin C on a regular basis? Probably. Should we take more of it if we're sick? 100%. If we understand the physiology of how the body's working, we can tell how to support these things. Physiological vitamin C concentrations, key functions of neutrophils. We just talked about that again, so we know it helps, but why aren't we doing more of it? How about loneliness? Loneliness predicts pain, depression, and fatigue, so understanding the role of immune dysregulation. What did we do to all of our kids when everybody got sick with COVID? We pulled them out of school, we made them do online school, we isolated. Now, was that okay for a couple weeks? Yeah, sure, I get it. Let's all kind of stay away from each other, slow down the spread. Couple weeks, sure, fine. Years went by and we were still isolating. If we're trying to build strong immune responses so we can stop COVID from being so bad, why are we doing all of these things that are weakening our immune response? How are we supposed to slow down the spread of a virus when we're weakening our immune system with every single thing we're doing? And you can tell we're not. The pandemic's over. It's cold and flu season. Just this morning, I had 4 people tell me that they've got flu B. 4 people in one day. We're no better off than we were 3 years ago before the pandemic started. Why? Because we didn't focus on building a strong, healthy immune response. Lack of movement, we talked about it. How are we supposed to build that strong immune response if we're not moving, if we're not sleeping, if we're smoking, putting chemicals into our body? Medications deplete the immune system. One of the top grossing, not one of the top, the top grossing medication, making the most money, more than any other medication in the entire country, at least in 2020, was an immune suppressing medication. More money than any other drug spent on an immune suppressing medication. And we wonder why our immune systems are so weak. Vitamin D. We know vitamin D is critical for so many different functions. One of the main ones is the immune response. If we look at a graph of who gets the most affected by the flu, the North gets affected more than the South, and that trend line follows almost directly with the UV index trend lines. As summer goes away, as we stop getting outside and moving, as we start staying inside, as we stop getting sunlight, we get less vitamin D, we start getting sick. And it happens more in the North where we aren't getting vitamin D. We know these things. Should you be supplementing with vitamin D in the winter? Probably. Do you need to make sure you have a good one? 100%. But should you be doing something to help support this? Absolutely. Typical American diet. Is going to McDonald's good for us? No. Is there still a line wrapped around every single fast food chain every single time I drive home from work? Yes. Why are we doing things that we know are bad for us? So, we know it weakens the immune response. Let's talk about how to build a strong immune response. Because we can't build a strong immune response if we're constantly weakening it. So we have to do those things first. Your immune system will start to come back if all you do is stop killing it all the time. It will come back on its own. How can we speed that process up? Well, understanding how to build the 3 different layers. The barrier immune response, the innate immune response, the acquired response. How do we start to support all these different things? How can we support all these different facets of that immune response? Again, it starts with the barrier. We've got barriers in the respiratory, the GI, the genitourinary, the nose, the pharynx, and we can support each one of those on an individual basis. Looking at the respiratory epithelium, OSHA, nettle leaf, licorice, amazing for supporting those things. Now, they're supplements, they're plants, they come from the ground. How many people have ever been told supplements aren't going to do anything, they're not going to work? It's complete BS. We literally have research showing nettle extract affects key receptors and enzymes associated with allergic rhinitis. What does that mean? It means that pollens are going to come into your sinuses, into your airway. They're going to activate receptor sites. Nettle binds to those receptors. It stops the allergens from binding to those receptors and creating an inflammatory cascade. It's going to help us at the barriers. Nettle also dries us out if we've got chronic coughs, constantly coughing up mucus, things like that. Nettle can help dry us out. It's awesome for people with allergies. How about licorice? Licorice does the opposite. It softens those mucous membranes. If we've got a really dry cough, if we're really hoarse, if we don't have that proper mucus barrier that's going to protect us, Nettle helps to soften that up, produce a little bit more of that barrier. So, should you go out and grab all these things? No, they all work differently. It depends on what's going on, but there's things that we can do to support here. How about the gut? Well, where does the gut start? It starts in our stomach. Acid, acid, acid. So important for the chemical barrier. Apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, digestible complex, which has betaine HCl. It has apple cider vinegar in there. How about building a strong mucus barrier? We know it's the acid. Stimulation from acid stimulates goblet cells. Goblet cells are specialized cells in your stomach that create the mucus barrier. If we don't have acid, we don't have a protective barrier. When we increase acid with no protective barrier, we get burning. Burning, heartburn, indigestion, GERD. What's the first thing that they put you on? Tums, Prilosec, omeprazole, things that reduce acid even further. How are we ever supposed to heal and repair the mucosal barrier so that we can have normal acid levels, so we can have normal protection and we can break down our food if we're constantly decreasing acid through medications that are going to further weaken that mucosal wall? Again, it doesn't make sense physiologically. What does make sense physiologically? Well, let's do things like chamomile, things like slippery elm that can help to actually stimulate the production of the mucus barrier. Let's slowly start to increase acid levels. What's the biggest thing that decreases acid in the stomach? Stress. Let's work on our stress. Let's calm that stress response down. Let's build that stomach acid back up. Let's build that protective barrier so you're not relying on medication, so you can have a normal immune response, a normal digestive response. Are we doing any of those things? No. Why not? I don't know. Do we know it works? Yeah, 100% we know it works. How do the goblet cells work? We know how the goblet cells work. What does omeprazole do? It can cause polyps. It can cause digestive dysfunction. It can cause acid regurgitation, constipation, nausea, vomiting. But we know that chamomile stimulates the goblet cells. Why would we not be doing things like that to help repair the body instead of just further manipulating it to cover up symptoms? How about the genital urinary tract? People with chronic UTIs, cystitis, things like that. Well, uva ursi is an astringent. What that means is it's going to help to bind those cells back up. It's going to suck that wall together to hold everything together. It used to be used to actually fight infections. We came up with sulfa drugs. We put a patent on it. We made billions of dollars on it. And now we don't use uva ursi anymore because we have medications for it. But medications have side effects. They manipulate your body. Plants don't manipulate your body. You use them. If you don't need it for a specific purpose, you get rid of it. Nose and pharynx epithelium, albizia. Albizia, very good at helping to suppress histamine signaling. It inhibits those receptors. It prevents mast cells from releasing histamine. It's also great for food allergies. People who are eating things they know they shouldn't, albizia is amazing. How about the acquired immune response? Well, let's look at what we can do to support that immune response from the top down. Because remember, these cells don't just exist on their own. They all come from the same type of cell. So what can we do to produce more stem cells, to stimulate the bone marrow, to produce more white blood cells? Astragalus. We know it does that. Astragalus is awesome. Bone marrow stem cell proliferation and protein expression. How about Rehmannia? Rehmannia exhibits anti-aging effects through maintaining the quiescence and decreasing the senescence of hematopoietic stem cells. What does that mean? It means that if we're using astragalus and we're using Rehmannia, we're going to be stimulating more stem cells that are stronger, larger, and last longer. So we're turning all of our stem cells into the Incredible Hulk so that they can do whatever they need to fight those infections. We know this because we've researched it. Why are we not doing it when we have research that proves it works? Chamomile, we talked about it for the stomach lining. Chamomile also helps to produce neutrophils. So here we go. The effect of chamomile on chemotherapy-induced neutropenia in pediatric leukemia patients, a randomized, triple-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. Randomized, triple-blind, placebo-controlled, the gold standard of what the medical system wants in a clinical trial. We have it showing chamomile helps to build neutrophils in people doing chemotherapy. Why are you not doing chamomile if you're going through chemotherapy? The research shows it works. The triple-blind placebo-controlled trial shows it works. Why aren't we doing it? Role of physiological vitamin C concentrations on key functions of neutrophils. Again, let's build our neutrophils. Camu powder, it's the highest naturally occurring source of vitamin C. Camu powder right behind acerola cherries. Both of those, camu berries, acerola cherries, very high in vitamin C. Not just ascorbic acid, that's only about 5% of the vitamin C complex. If you're taking high dose ascorbic acid, you're not getting vitamin C. You're getting the preservative part of vitamin C, and you're missing all the other benefits. So get it from food. Chamomile, let's build a strong neutrophil response. We talked about vitamin C. How about monocytes? The first thing that elevates when you get sick, monocytes, they help to stimulate the rest of the immune response. Elderberry, honeysuckle, reishi stimulate that monocyte response. We know elderberry, phenolic compounds and metabolites, their effect on the complement, the signaling cascade, macrophages and dendritic cells. So if we get sick, we need a high level of monocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells. First thing you should take as soon as you start to feel sick, ramp up the elderberry, the honeysuckle, the reishi. Get those cells proliferating, strengthen those cells that are then going to coordinate the rest of the immune response. What else? Natural killer cells, echinacea, reishi. We're going to tell. So recent findings indicate that reishi induces natural killer cell cytotoxicity, meaning that they can kill cells better. If we're trying to just survey for cancer cells, if we're trying to eradicate cancer and virally infected cells, we need natural killer cells. If we know that reishi mushroom increases their cytotoxicity, why would we not be adding that in if we're going through cancer treatment? Why would we not be taking that on a regular basis if we're trying to boost our immune response? These effects of echinacea associated with significant and sustained increase in the number of circulating total white blood cells, so all of our white blood cells, monocytes, neutrophils, and natural killer cells. Echinacea, all the time. Take echinacea before you go somewhere you think you might get sick. If you're traveling on a vacation, if you're going to another country, if you're going to be around large groups of people, family, kids, things like that, where there's likelihood of getting infected, take echinacea, take reishi, boost your immune system. Why would you not do those things? We know they help support the immune response. How about wormwood? T lymphocytes, CD4 cells, CD8 cells, the specialized foot soldiers within the immune system. Wormwood helps to increase those if we're fighting a virally infected cell, if we're fighting a cancer cell. Things that can increase those cell types can help support that. The other really cool thing about wormwood, it has a compound in it called artemisinin. Artemisinin, very similar to hydroxychloroquine. What's the main thing that all the alternative people were giving during COVID because it worked? Hydroxychloroquine. We know they work together. Artemisinin, aka wormwood, and hydroxychloroquine combination therapy on IgA nephropathy via regulating the differentiation of CD4 cells. Now, this is what I said. We're going basic overview. There's a lot of different types of CD4 cells. They need to be able to differentiate appropriately. Wormwood helps that differentiation. How about chaga? How about building a strong B cell response so that if we get exposed to something, we can create antibodies, we can magnify those antibodies, and we can help clear infections out faster. Why would we not do that? We know it works. We know it's adaptogenic for B cells. We know exactly how it works. All the sugars, the glycosides that are in mushrooms help support the body. So we can support all of these things. So again, the new definition of the immune system, all the mechanisms used by the body as protection against environmental agents, internal and external, that are foreign to the body. These agents can be microorganisms or chemicals, products, food, drugs, pollen, animals, or abnormal cells. We know it weakens the immune system. Now, hopefully, we know a little bit more about how to support it. So again, talking about what weakens the immune system. Allergies, environmental pollutants, things like that. We can talk about allergies. We can understand how to support our bodies better. So allergies are when the immune system reacts to a foreign substance such as pollen, bee venom, pet dander, or food. Doesn't normally cause a reaction in most people, but in your case, your body's formed antibodies to it, so it does create an immune response. The immune system produces antibodies. If your immune system makes antibodies that identify an allergen, so a non-harmful substance, as harmful, even though it isn't, you have an allergy. When there is contact with the allergen, your immune system's overreaction can inflame your skin, sinuses, airways, or digestive system. Now, what are the antibodies? We've got a bunch of different types of antibodies here. We've got IgG, A, M, and E types of antibodies. They all look different. They all do different types of things. And they all mediate different reaction types. So, allergies. Allergies are hypersensitivity reactions. We have 4 types of hypersensitivity reactions. When we think of allergies, we think of these type 1 IgE immediate reactions. The medical system has brainwashed us all to think that the only type of allergy that you can have is a type 1 immediate allergy. If you eat a peanut, your throat closes up. If you get stung by a bee and your body blows up like a balloon, those are the immediate responses. Now, these are the most severe. They're life-threatening. They can kill you. They create anaphylaxis. Is it very important to know if we have those types of allergies? 100%. But is it the only type of allergic response, the only type of hypersensitivity response? No, we have 3 other responses here. All 3 of these responses create cellular damage. They create an immune response. They create inflammation in the body. If we know what's triggering these responses, why would we not stop putting ourselves in contact with those things? Just because they can't kill you doesn't mean it's good for you. So we can test that. We can look at IgG antibody reactions. These are food sensitivities or hypersensitivities or intolerances. That's what this is testing for. I hate the word intolerance because intolerance makes you think it's not a big deal. We know they're cytotoxic. We know they create immune system issues. We know they activate T cells and macrophages and their delayed responses. If we know they're creating damage in our body, creating inflammation, why would we not test for them to understand what they are? It makes up a much larger portion of your immune system also, about 70% of your portion of your immune system, just these delayed type responses. This particular patient has 23 of them. That's 23 things that they're eating potentially every single day, potentially multiple times a day, that are triggering their immune response. And they wonder why they're constantly inflamed, why they're constantly immunosuppressed, why they're not able to build a strong immune system. Again, we can't heal the body if we're putting stress on it. We're going to run out of gas if we don't take our foot off the pedal. We've got to take our foot off the pedal. So if you don't know, how can you do that? Getting tested is very important. We can also look at the gut. We can look at what that first line immune response is. We can look at your IgA. We can look if there's bacteria, parasites, yeast, if there's other infections in there that are constantly putting a stress on the immune system. We can look at if there's calprotectin, eosinophil protein X. We can look if there's blood in your stool. We can look at what those 100 trillion bacteria look like. We can test it so we can understand where you're at so that we can work to improve it. And we can also test the entire adaptive immune system. We can test the natural killer cells. We can test the lymphocyte enumeration helper, which gives us CD4-CD8 ratio. It gives us our natural killer cells. It tells us all of that. If we can test for it, we can evaluate where your body's at. And if we know where your body's at, we know what your risk is, and we know how to support it to help give you the best chance to fight infections in the future. So what do we need to do? We need to avoid mental stress. Yoga, meditation, practicing gratitude, all of those things reduce that mental stress, build a strong immune response. We need to avoid sugar, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, even fruits. I didn't put fruits on the list, but natural sugar versus artificial sugar. Do you think your body knows the difference between whether the glucose molecule came from an apple or whether it came from white bread? Do you think that the receptors on the neutrophils that bring vitamin C know the difference between whether that glucose it's binding came from an apple or a banana or a piece of white bread? And everybody says, oh, well, I eat organic. I eat healthy. Well, great. Then you'll be organically sick and organically immunosuppressed. So we have to watch our sugar intake. Doesn't matter where it comes from. If you're going into the holidays, like most of us are, if you're watching this video and I filmed it, it's November. We're about to have Thanksgiving, we're about to have Christmas, we're about to have New Year's, all of these holidays where we misbehave a little bit. There's things that we can do. Gymnema, Oregon grape, coleus, all help to support the way our body handles sugar. So if you're going to misbehave, we can give you supplements to help support it to make sure it's not going to be as damaging. How about loneliness? Join a club. If you're watching this in Florida, or I guess really anywhere in the country now, pickleball everywhere. So many of our patients join pickleball clubs. It helps them get engaged with other people. That's the biggest thing. Get engaged with other people. Don't work from home. Go back to the office. Socialize with your family and friends. Do things to avoid loneliness. How about lack of movement? Let's exercise 3 to 4 days a week. Let's go for a walk at sunrise, at sunset. It's good for multiple things. The last 45 minutes, the first 45 minutes of the day, it's a different wavelength of light. It's very healing, very good for your body. Get out, get sun, See the sunset. It helps your circadian rhythm. It helps with sleep. It helps with all these things. We just need to do it. How about Vibe plates? We stand on Vibe plates all the time. Helps with lymphatic drainage. Lymphatic movement is what circulates blood cells through the body. It circulates those white blood cells. So if we can get better lymphatic drainage, we're going to help mobilize that immune response and get adjusted. How about lack of sleep? Let's create bedtime routines. Let's start wearing blue light blockers to get rid of some of that blue light so that we're not decreasing our melatonin production at night. If we can't sleep, if our mind is racing, if we've got all these things going on, well then let's get a little bit of support to help with that. California poppy, kava, CBD oil, valerian, melatonin, alcidonia, L-theanine. We have things that can help that. We just need to do them to help get us moving in the right direction. And how about the typical American diet? We could talk for a whole nother hour about diet, but let's make it easy. Let's prepare most of our meals at home. Let's avoid ingredients we can't pronounce. Let's shop around the outside of the grocery store. Let's get our food allergies tested so we know what's creating an inflammatory response and we can avoid those things. And before you get sick, let's do things to build that strong immune response. Astragalus, let's start top down, building those strong Hulk cells. Ashwagandha, let's support our body's ability to handle the stress we're putting on it. Echinacea, building strong neutrophils. Monocytes, natural killer cells. Vitamin C, let's do these things before we get sick to build a strong immune system. If we're already sick, what do we need to have in our medicine cabinet? Didn't change the pictures. We need to have elderberry, colloidal silver, extra vitamin C. This is where it's okay to have ascorbic acid too. We just acidify the body, help support it. And we need to talk to our Wellness Way doctor because we know a lot more specifics about the herbs. We know how to support specific things, whether you have upper respiratory infection, whether you've got gut infections, whether you've got the cold, the flu, whatever it is. There's different things that we can do to help support your body to deal with those things so that your immune system can function and operate at 100%. I hope you learned a little bit. Comment down below whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or wherever. Comment, let me know if you have questions. We'd love to help you out in the office. And again, I hope you learned something. Thank you.